All right, I'm gonna start like a little bit early because it's just really awkward to just stand up here and everyone's like silent, staring at me.
We can keep doing that.
Do you want to keep doing that, Joel? Awesome. Well, thanks for coming. Glad to see you all here at the Bad Camp. We're going to be talking about the future of development today. Specifically, we'll be talking about an open source project that we have called Lando. My name is Mike. If you don't know me, I'm the CTO and co-founder of a company called Tandem. We were born out of the Drupal space, but we also do projects in other technologies like WordPress and Laravel, Node. We've done some Ruby development as well. Our big sort of overriding maxim as an organization is we try to deliver value to clients as fast as possible. Which means that we try to minimize meetings, we try to have meetings be well scheduled, and we try to find the quickest path to get you from point A to point B. Which is to say, basically, we try to do fixed rate engagements because charging for, if you're an agency charges or makes money by charging billable hours, that is fundamentally opposed to the client's probably best interests, i.e. like they want you to do things as quick as possible. And if your incentive is to maximize hours, then that's a fundamental sort of problem. I'm also a huge fan of science. Any science fans in the house? Cool, some science fans, some non-science fans as well, that's fun. Also a history fan. Huge Rutherford B. Hayes fan. Any Rutherford B. Hayes fans in the house?
Pierce.
Pierce? It's from my home state of New Hampshire. Commonly referred to as the worst president in history, although debatable now. Anyways, yeah, so let's start talking about Lando. So if anyone has heard of Calabox before, Lando is sort of Calabox 3. I would describe it more as a spiritual successor to Calabox 3. It's actually quite different and it's not really a next version. It's actually completely different. It's currently in a late beta phase, but we are actually recommending it to people who are currently using Calabox. There is no GUI component of it. That is something that we are planning to make at some point, but there's no real timeline to do that. So right now it's a CLI-only tool. Other things you need to know about Lando is that he makes bad deals with Sith Lords. Thank you for all the joke, the laughings there. And that Lando will be so much winning that you will all get sick of it. So let's dive a little bit deeper into what Lando is. Or maybe not. Maybe let's do this slide instead. What are we covering today? So what we're covering today is we're going to go over some Lando basics, which is like sort of how it works and how you use it. And then we're going to be going over some recipes that we have. These will be mostly Drupal specific recipes since we are at a Drupal conference. And then we're going to we can be a little bit flexible after that based on what people's desires are, but we can go into more advanced usage. We can talk about Lando as like a CI type solution or a testing solution. But let's just get through the basics first. This is usually like a 4-hour training, so it's very possible that I just run out of time and we don't get to all this stuff, in which case, sorry. Just see me later, I guess. So yeah, now on to like what Lando is. So Lando is is per app. The basic like overriding principle of what Lando is you should be able to git clone a repository that has your project in it. You should be able to run Lando start. And you should be able to get all the things that you need to run that project and the tools that you need to develop that project. And the way that works is we have a simple config file called the .lando.yaml file, a fairly common syntax for this sort of thing. Lando itself is actually multiple abstraction layers on top of Docker Compose. So you can use one of our predefined recipes and do like a 2-line config file and just sort of get what we recommend as good things to have. Or you can go really, really crazy and scaffold out very complicated apps. And I'll show you sort of what that looks like in a little bit. Lando also has nice hosting integration, specifically just for Pantheon right now. That's something that we've transferred over from our Calabox project. It is a cross-platform tool. You need to have Windows 10 Pro or equivalent for it to run on Windows. So sorry if you're not on Windows 10 Pro, I guess. Sorry if you're on Windows, first of all. And then sorry if you're not on Windows 10 Pro. One of the easiest ways to think about Lando is basically as a local dev dependency management tool. So these are the core languages that Lando supports. Lando is not a Drupal-specific or PHP-specific project. Yes, you can run a .NET app with Lando. That's not a joke, as indicated by the not a joke comment next to the .NET thing up there. That all said, almost like 80% of the usage that we have right now are people who are doing PHP projects. That's mostly because we're in the PHP space. But we're hoping that eventually at some point people will use Lando for other things. I know that we've done a couple of like mean stacks with Lando. And I know that a couple of people have done some Python projects with Lando, which is pretty fun. Right now, it comes with all of these services. So these are all swappable. You can add them or take them away in any combination you want on a per project basis. We add to this list fairly often. We try to add one or two every release, but these are sort of I think the big ones that most people are used to and want to have. So I'll show some examples of how that all works in a little bit. And then we have these like pre-baked sort of start states. So if you're using any of these things, we'll sort of configure the things I just showed you for you really easily, so you can just sort of get running. Any Joomla fans in the house? Okay. So just to go over some sort of current usage, this is a graph of the breakdown of the kinds of apps that people are using with Lando right now. This big green blob are people who are using Lando specifically with Pantheon. This is an interesting sort of data point because as people who have used Calabox in the past know that it's primarily used with Pantheon. So our Calabox usage, that's 95% is for the Pantheon use case. You can see Lando is much more of a general purpose tool. Only about, I don't know, what 40%-ish of people are using it with Pantheon. You can see that there's many people using it for just normal Drupal 8 development, WordPress development, Drupal 7. Somebody in here must have typed, where is it? I thought it was in here somewhere. Maybe it's actually further back, but there was one person who had obviously typed in Drupal as Drupal, so that was showing up in here for a while. That was sort of fun to look at. I don't know how successful that person was, but all good. Yeah, we've got people who are using it for like Laravel development. I think that's in here somewhere. Looks like there's we do not support this, but it looks like somebody tried to maybe make a Magento recipe. If that person is here, please see me afterwards. I'm curious about your adventure. So that's sort of the breakdown in usage. The only non-PHP thing that's sort of prevalent is there's some mean developers, and that's really sort of the biggest one. So let's continue on our Lando adventure. So let's talk about the core thing that makes all the magic happen, which is the .lando.yaml file. There are, as I mentioned before, Lando is multiple abstraction layers on top of Docker Compose. So you can do something like this. This is a valid. Oh, it's sort of hard to see. Can people see that okay enough? So this is a valid Lando file that would spin up basically like a MAMP equivalent stack for you. This is sort of the easiest way that you can do things. You can also configure that recipe a little bit, so you can sort of add the basic stuff like, oh, I actually want PHP 5.6. My web root is in this folder called web, and this is the database that I want. Or you can do more complicated things like this. So in this example, we would also be adding a node container that has node 6.10 in it with gulp installed. That's really nice. One of the key benefits of Lando over some more traditional development environments is we also try to package. We also want you to manage your tools this way. People who have worked on projects know that the different node version between developers problem is a real thing. So this allows you to lock down the version of Node that you're using on a project-to-project basis, and eliminates the need to actually have the developer install it, which is nice because sadly that can sometimes be a tricky thing. So let's just go over a basic example. We'll spin this up more or less, and then we'll just continue on the journey and do more complicated stuff. Does anybody have any questions at this point?
So is Docker required to run Lando?
Yeah, so great question. Lando does use Docker under the hood, so it is required. On Linux, we require that you install it yourself. That's mostly just because it's hard for us to automate that, because there's many ways to install Docker on Linux and many variants of Linux. If you install Lando we have like a package installer, so it's like installing a normal Mac or Windows application. If you run that installer, it will install Docker for you automatically. It will install Docker for Mac on Mac and Docker for Windows on Windows. The only caveat there is we require that you have the factory default settings, which is most people. If you do not have the factory default settings, you probably don't need something like Lando. So let's go over a very basic demo. So I've spun up this like extremely complicated PHP application that runs PHP info. This is probably one of the easiest and most stable apps that you can run in production. Very good to have this cached, obviously. So I'm in my web root right now. You can maybe make that a little bit bigger for you guys. So yeah, so I've got this index.php, and I have Lando on my command line. I can run Lando and see a bunch of different commands. We can go through some of those in a second. But let's just say that I wanted to get started with Lando. Step number 1 is I can run this lando init command, and that will ask me what sort of recipe I want to start from. In this case, we just have a normal PHP application, so I'm going to choose. Actually, is there like a preference for nginx or Apache in here? Yeah.
Definitely X.
Okay. Wasn't sure which one you picked, so I'm going to do this one. So I'm just going to pick a lamp stack. Tell it that my web root is in the repo root as well. Let's call this app. Or what was that? What was that? I love lamp. There we go. I love lamp. And it will automatically generate a very basic lando.yaml file for me for this. And you can see it right here, very simple. I guess in my text editor, it looks like that. So a very bare bones example, similar to what we were looking at in the slide deck. Once I do that, I can run this lando start command. I'm going to pass in some extra verbosity to this so you can see all the magic that happens. So what it will do is it'll grab Docker containers that are required to launch this app, and then it will launch the app. And when it's done, you'll get this nice little boom shakalaka. I don't know if there's any NBA Jam fans in the house, but hopefully. And you'll get a nice break, like a high-level breakdown of your service. This is like, of your app, what it's called, where it lives, and like the two types of containers that were spun up. And then it'll give you a bunch of URLs that you can use to access the app. We try to provide these nice like vanity URLs, human readable URLs. But every app will also have localhost URLs as well. So if for whatever reason these don't work, and there are reasons why those might not work, you'll be able to access with these ones. And if the site is not accessible, these URLs will show up as like red, and we all know that red means bad. So that will happen. So let's go a little bit further into this. We can run lando info, and lando info will give us even more details about our service. So we can see that we have two containers, an app server container that is running PHP 7.1 via Apache. Here's those URLs again. And then here's information about our database, including port and access information, credentials, so we can access it either internally or externally. By internally, I mean if you're inside of the Docker container. So if you were if you were spinning up a Drupal site and it was asking you for your database credentials, that would be internal. If you're connecting with like SQL Pro or some other GUI client, then you can use the external one. First of all, let's just click on the site and verify that this complicated example works. There it is. Yes, super impressive, I know. Let's go into a little bit more of the basic commands that you would get with a sort of stack like this. Oops, nope, wrong one, sorry. Just Lando. Lando will give you a list of the commands. There are many commands that you would expect for a tool like this. So if you have used vagrant or something like that, we have the normal start, stop, restart, rebuild, destroy. I'm not going to go over those. I feel like they're extremely self-apparent. In this example, you can see that we add some common tools for a LAMP stack. So right off the bat, you'll get Composer. You'll get access to PHP. You'll get access to the MySQL command line tool. So I can go here and run Lando PHP, oops, and use the right flag, and just see, oh yeah, I do have this. My container has PHP 7.1 that matches up with what my app server has. That makes sense. Or I can go here and I can start to do Lando Composer things. I'm just going to run like Lando Composer, whatever. And you can see I have Composer. So the idea basically is I could like take my laptop and I could go to the bathroom and I could flush it down the toilet and then buy a new laptop and basically install Lando, download this app again, run Lando start, and get all the tools that I need without having to install any on my computer. So these are all running in the container. You're not installing anything else on your machine. You don't have to mess with Homebrew or permissions or managing multiple versions of PHP or multiple versions of Node. It's all just sort of baked in here. I can run Lando destroy and it's all gone in a second. So just an example of some of the tools that we sort of ship with by default. Later on, when we switch to a Drupal recipe, you'll see that you also get drush and you'll get Drupal console, and those are configurable as well. It's really easy to add additional tools. We'll do that as we proceed on this example a little bit more. So let's go through and just maybe show a couple of the other commands that we have that are nice. We have db export and db import helper commands, which are nice to get your database in there. You can also just use the connection info and use the tool of your choice. There's access to logs. So if I wanted to check out and see, hey, like what's actually going on behind the scenes here, this Lando logs command, and it says, oh, look, my database did all this stuff, and it looks confusing, and I don't want to look at that anymore. But you can see stuff. There's also a Lando SSH command, so if you are interested in going in and hacking around, you can do that. You can go into any container. By default, it'll drop you into the app server container, but you could go into the database. And then you can go in here and do your Linuxy things. So if you wanted to add or augment some of the stuff that we have in here, this would be a way to do it, especially if you're familiar with doing sysadmin-y Linuxy things. And then we have this nifty Lando share command, which let's run real quick. Try to do an example of that. A Lando share is basically if I'm a developer and I want to expose my local site to somebody on the internet, I can do that with this. Or if I'm a developer who wants to look at my site on a mobile phone, I could use Lando share to get a publicly accessible URL. Oops. You have to write the command correctly for it to work. Always a good pro tip. So if we go to this I love LAMP, so any one of you can go. Oh.
Wow.
No, maybe not.
Any one of us?
Yeah. That's strange. I would try this maybe on your own time as possible. That there's like Berkeley is blocking ports for this to work or something. But theoretically, you could go to this site and see the Lando info page that I have running on my computer. Definitely like a nice little feature to have. So let's go in and dig into a broader, more complicated example. So I definitely highly recommend that you all check out both docs.devwithlando.io and our GitHub repository, which is just github.com/lando/lando. This has really great examples in it that can help you get started if you're unsure about what to do. You can see that there are many examples. So if you wanted to try out that coveted .NET support, I believe that is here. Oh yeah, it's real. I would highly recommend that you look at our documentation. I think that this is actually one of the more, probably one of the better things of our whole project is the documentation. And we're going to use the documentation right now to sort of customize our app. So we've got a LAMP recipe, and we want to figure out whether we can tweak it a little bit for our use case. We can go to this nice getting started with LAMP doc, and there's a bunch of interesting stuff in here, the documentation about how to actually spin up your site. you can actually, Lando has functionality to automatically pull sites from Pantheon or GitHub. So you could do that as part of your initialization process. We did not do that in this. Then some helpful tips about how to get your stuff running, how to import your database, like what tools are available. And then here's like the sort of configuration section. So let's play around with this a little bit and see how we can change things. The main things that you can configure for just a straight up LAMP recipe are the version of PHP, the location of the web root, the kind of database you're using. That basically means MySQL, Maria, or Postgres. All are supported. Whether you want to turn xdebug on, or optionally if you want to like go a little bit hog wild and like actually inject some custom configuration files. Basically, like that's the section for the masochists in the room. So let's proceed and just change this example around a little bit and see what will happen. So let's say that we think PHP 7.1 is too good for us, and we want to roll back to a version that we're comfortable with, and that reveals how poor of a PHP developer we are, or how bad of a client we have. And let's also change the web root. Let's say that we're interested in implementing some sort of composer-based workflow, and we want to have our web root in a different location. So let's move that to a folder called web, and let's make that folder called web, and let's move our index file in there. Actually, let's make a new index file so we can actually differentiate between the two. Index.php, and let's just do a very basic. Any Miley Cyrus fans in the house? No, just me. It's all right. If you're ashamed and don't want to admit it, you can tell me afterwards in confidence. So we've done that. Now we just want to restart the app. So we're going to do this Lando restart command. You can also do a Lando rebuild command if you want to actually if you want to destroy and rebuild the containers from scratch. So we'll just do this Lando restart. And when the restart is complete, we should be serving that file that's in the web root that we specified, and we should have a different version of PHP, which we will verify by using that Lando PHP command. And actually, so this is going to pull down, this is pulling down a Docker container right now, so this will be a good test of how good the Wi-Fi is here. So this could take 1 minute, or this could, oh, it looks like we're done. That's good. Okay. I was worried that would be like the rest of the presentation right there. So now we should be able to visit our site. We can see that we are now partying in the United States of America. Always good to know. And if we run our Lando PHP version, we should see that we have a whole bunch of gobbledygook, and we have something that is not right at all. Sorry, I maybe have done something wrong here. Let's just try that out really quick. Oh yeah, PHP 5.3, so I don't know what this is then. Not accurate anyway. Anyway, we can see here in the PHP info, the app server is now running PHP 5.3. Not sure why that Lando PHP command did not show the same thing, but it should. Just an example of like switching PHP versions, very easy to do. You can change the web root, something like that. Let's move on to, actually, does anyone have any questions so far? Otherwise, we'll move on to a Drupal-y example.
So it just works sort of natively with Git. If you just have Git in there and then you commit, does it ignore the Lando stuff, or is that something you have to add to your Git?
You're going to want to add it to your Git repository. Yeah, I think the ideal sort of Lando workflow is like you have your sysadmin or your engineer or your DevOps person create the Lando file when you start the project. You commit it to the repository, and then you tell all your other developers, clone the repository down, run Lando start, and that's all they need to do. Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, Mike.
Hi.
2 questions for you. So the first one is around Docker. So Docker wasn't really native on OS 10 last time I looked into this. Is it now native? Sort of as native as it was with Linux?
No. So there is yeah. I mean, native is a confusing word in this context, I think. But Docker will spin up a virtual machine for you on Mac using this thing called
virtual machine that then runs the containers.
Yeah. So there's a lightweight virtual machine that runs. It feels like it's native, but it's not really native.
Right.
And by that, I mean you just don't have like a giant VirtualBox instance running that you are aware of.
Right.
The biggest thing that I think has improved with Docker for Mac lately is very recently they improved their file sharing performance considerably. That was like the huge blocker for a lot of these tools in the past, was it was sort of unusable. And now we find that for a Drupal 8 site, it's a little bit slow still, but I think it's like an acceptable level of performance, whereas it was like unusable before. So that's been the big sort of breakthrough in the last like 2 or 3 months.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
Although now, so second question is that how is the syncing happening between containers and the host file system? Can you choose between rsync and NTFS?
No, so Docker for Mac will use this thing that they developed called OSXFS, and that's the mechanism that does the file sharing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the reason why I bring that up is Apple's new file system and NTFS has a big bug.
Yeah.
So you can't actually, if you want to use NTFS, you just shouldn't upgrade to the new 10.1.
Yeah, and I'm running on High Sierra right now, and we just edited a file, so it's whatever the mechanism that Docker uses behind the scenes is compatible with High Sierra. Yeah, I think that they did release a whole bunch of. I did see a whole bunch of Docker for Mac updates that came out, basically like the day after Sierra came out, that had a bunch of fixes in them. So I assume that there might have been some issue at some point, but they've resolved them. And we're packaging in the latest version of Docker with Lando right now, so you should be just getting those fixes as well.
And I said NTFS, but it's actually NFS.
NFS, yeah. Sure.
So when you edited the Lando YAML file to change the PHP version, you did a Lando restart.
Yeah.
And you said you could also do a rebuild.
Yeah.
When would you want to do one versus the other? And if you're like running a Drupal site with a database and stuff, what happens when you do one versus the other?
Yeah, that's a great question. And unfortunately, there isn't like an obvious line to separate the two. It's sort of a blurry space. I think the best way to think about it right now is like if you require the complete, if a change in a YAML file requires like the complete and total destruction of your containers and then the rebuilding of those containers, then you want to do a Lando rebuild. So and it's difficult. It's really on a case-by-case basis. So for example, switching PHP versions, I can do a Lando restart and that's no big deal. If I wanted to switch from a Postgres database to like a MySQL database, like a lot of those data files are volumed. So I actually need to destroy them completely and then rebuild them. Otherwise, you're going to have a MySQL database that's trying to load Postgres data files, which is obviously going to result in a problem. Another good rule of thumb is Lando restart is faster, so just do that first. If you do not get the result that you're looking for, do Lando rebuild. But it would be good for us to develop clearer guidelines on when to use one versus the other. But right now, it's just there's no real obvious way for me to describe why you would do one over the other. So let's move on and do a Drupal example really quick. I think I actually can move to the slide deck, wherever that went. Where did that go? Oh man, did I like close my own slide deck? That was very smooth. Don't close the slide deck that you're presenting while you're presenting. All right. Yeah, so here, so this is probably not a great place for this stuff to be in the slide deck. But if you do want to install Lando, these are the places you would go to do that. We do have package installers for the things, so we make it really easy for you to install them. I.e., like if you want to use Lando and you don't give a shit about Docker, or don't want to give a shit about Docker, or just don't care at all about any of that stuff, you can install this and it will install the dependencies that you need. We do offer like bleeding source and source-based like nightly builds. So if you wanted to like use bleeding edge stuff, we do releases pretty often, so probably not super relevant. And then the documentation is really good as well. I would definitely go there as first stop. So Landifying a Drupal site, the things that you'll need are a folder with Drupal in it, or a GitHub repo with Drupal in it, or any other repo with Drupal in it. And if we use a Lando recipe, these are the things that we should expect to be able to customize and get right out of the box, which is the ability to switch between PHP and nginx, the ability to specify the database that we want, the ability to switch PHP versions, some other custom stuff like being able to turn xdebug, and then Drupal-specific tools like Composer, Drush, Drupal console, PHP, MySQL. So here's an example that we'll do really quick, which is just pulling, I guess this is a Drupal 7 example, but pulling the canonical Drupal 7 upstream, and then Lando initting the site for Drupal 7, and then Lando starting the site. So let's just copy and paste this example and see whether that's a dumb idea or not. So let's just do that. Oh yeah, I forgot this is probably pretty big, right? We have Dries's commits from 2001 in his college dorm in here still. While this is happening, any additional questions?
What about if you wanted to do like varnish, redis, solr?
Yeah, great question. So we can actually add that. We can do that as part of this example. But in the Lando documentation, you can add any of these services to any of the apps that you have. So there's Varnish, there's Solr, there's Elasticsearch, Memcache, MongoDB, Postgres, phpmyadmin, Node, MariaDB, Go. So any of those things can be added. If you wanted to have a site that had 15 Varnish installations on it, that's doable. Probably stupid, but doable. Okay, so that actually was faster than I expected it to be. So we're in our Drupal site here. Maybe I'll just add this to my text editor really quick. Drupal. There's Drupal, the Drupal 7 that we all know and love. And let's just go in here and do a Lando init. And it'll ask us what recipe we want. We'll choose Drupal 7. Web root is in the root. Let's call this Drupals. So it'll create that .lando.yaml file, and we can run Lando start. And when this is done, we should have a Drupal-y specific set of containers for tools and other things to develop our Drupal site. So if we click on this link now, we should expect to see the Drupal 7 install screen. Indeed we do. That's exciting. Now let's dig into this a little bit more and run Lando in here. And we can see that because this is a Drupal-specific site, we have things like drush that are available to us. So I could now go in here and do my Lando drush status, for example, and it should complain probably that we haven't installed Drupal, or that we have no settings file. Yeah, settings file is missing. So yeah, right off the bat, we have drush. So if you don't like to install drush or don't want to install drush, you can just do something like this. Let's go in and check out how we can configure this recipe a little bit more. So let's check out the documentation for our Drupal 7 site. You can see there's some good examples on importing database and the tools that you would get. Yeah, then there's the configuration options. They look very similar to what we saw with the LAMP stack. So we can configure PHP version, whether we want nginx or Apache. You also, I don't think this is documented, but you also could put CLI in here as an option. So Lando is not actually, you can develop any kind of thing with Lando. It doesn't have to be a website. So if I wanted to use Lando to just build a drush extension or something like that, I could put CLI in there and just get the PHP version that I needed. So we actually, Lando itself was a Node.js application, and we use Lando itself to develop Lando, which I know is super meta, but we are in Berkeley, so I feel it's appropriate. And that's nice because then we can ensure that everyone who develops Lando is actually using the required versions of Node and other things that we need to develop Lando. So there's an example of some stuff, but let's move on to a more complicated thing. Let's maybe say that we're a front-end developer and we want to package in some Node goodness to our site. So we can go in and we can add additional services. So let's add a service called Node. let's say that we want to use node 6 or just node 6. And let's say that we want to, do people prefer grunt or gulp here? I know it's a super gulp. Grunt. He said that with a lot of authority, so I feel like maybe. So let's go in here and do. Actually, I don't remember the syntax. This is why having your own documentation is good, because you don't have to remember everything. So let's see. If I wanted to add a node service, I go down to here. Here's the versions that we have that are available. Here are the options that we have. Here we go. Actually, it uses the gulp example already. And then Lando has this nice way to define additional commands. So let's say that I wanted to like self-contain all of my node stuff in here. I could do something like this. Oops, we're calling this service node. Are there any Yarn fans in the house? Oops. So let's restart this app now. And when we're done, we should have an additional container running, node 6 dot whatever. We should be able to access it via those tooling commands that we just put into that file. So this is a great way to keep your front-end developers all on the same page, and to eliminate some of the headaches of installing global dependencies like the gulp CLI. Oops, I think I actually did this incorrectly. Oh, yeah, sorry. Follow your own directions. Maybe I'll just copy this whole thing. Oops. So the nice thing about this as well is you could use this same node service to actually run a node instance. I.e., like if you wanted to do like a headless Drupal sort of thing, then you could use, oh, you know, maybe I was starting the wrong app. Anyway, let's try this again. I apologize for not knowing the commands to my own thing well enough, but I'm getting old. Okay, so let's just make sure that this is the right. Yeah, okay, so that's why. I'm an idiot and this is the wrong file. Sorry, I apologize for my idiocy. So we want to actually add this to the Drupal one. There we go. That makes way more sense. All right, let's try again. See that it's stopping the database and the app server, and it should be, when it starts up again, it should be grabbing the node container for us to use as well. Yes, and it is, so good. I actually succeeded. Second time is the charm, apparently. And you can see now that because we told it to install the gulp CLI globally, that's what it's doing right now, apparently in like the maximum verbosity mode. Not sure why that's the case, but. Okay, so you can see now we have this additional service that's listed here, which is really nice. And if we run our Lando command, we can see that we have the ability to run yarn now. We have the ability to run npm, node, and gulp. So if I go in here and I do Lando node version, it should say 6 dot whatever, 6.10. Cool, so I have containerized node that's locked down onto this project. Ditto, I could go in here and run. So say I wasn't super happy about grunt or gulp, and I wanted to try grunt out, I can now do that. That's a valid thing to do. Oops, sorry, you have to actually run the right thing. Install. So now I'm installing the grunt CLI globally in there. And I can run gulp because we put that in there as well. So gulp CLI version. So just an example of how you can add additional stuff. I'm actually sort of running out of time. So is there anything in particular that someone would like to see or questions?
Well, I do have a question. So there's now a lot of energy in this space. So there's Doxel, Lando. Have you guys sorted out how you're going to differentiate between each other? One of the things here that you didn't get to show was uploading directly to Pantheon, which is automatically
Yeah.
a benefit.
Yeah. I wanted this to be more of a generic presentation. Yeah, our Pantheon integration is really nice. Regarding all the tools that exist, I don't know. I think that's probably the best answer to give. There are points of differentiation between all of them. Like Lando's point of differentiation, I think, is that it's a generic local development tool. It's not Drupal specific or PHP specific. I think our documentation is really good, but there's other things too. So I think it's one of those things where just you got to try them out and pick the one that you like.
Well, one thing might be that if Doxel uses NFS still, they're going to get bit by the APFS bug, whereas you can use Lando right away.
Yeah, that's possible. But you would. Yeah, I mean, I guess in that specific scenario, that would probably be beneficial to you. Yeah. But there are problems with Docker for Mac as well. So, if you have a Drupal 8 site that has a real large amount of files, like it's probably going to be faster to use NFS than it is going to use Docker for Mac's native file sharing. Would be my guess. I haven't benchmarked that, but I'm assuming that that's probably the case.
Okay.
So you would have to figure out, does it make, again, just try them both out, and if you like the experience with Lando, then use Lando, and if you don't, then I hate you, but that's okay, I understand. So I can continue on here and build out this example, or maybe I can blow through some other slides really quick, then we can do some questions to end things. So I guess the high-level takeaway from this presentation is that 45 minutes is not really a lot of time. So I'll just go over some of the other basic stuff really quick. Feel free to come to the Tandem booth afterwards if you want to see more complicated examples. I'm more than happy to demo anything. But yeah, so one of the other nice things about Lando is there's automatic integration with Pantheon. There also is documentation on the platform.sh docs about how to use Lando and platform. It's not as tight as an integration as we have with Pantheon, but it's moving in that direction, so that's good. So if people are using Pantheon, all you need to get is a Pantheon machine token, which is fairly straightforward. And there's this nifty Lando init Pantheon command, which will actually go and get your site from Pantheon, pull it down, and spin up the things that you need. An optional improvement that we've made is a lot of people like to use build processes these days. So if your Pantheon upstream is actually hosted on GitHub, you can pull a site from GitHub and tell it that it's a Pantheon site, i.e. you don't have to tie yourself to the actual Pantheon repository anymore, which was something that you had to do on Calabox. If you spin up a Pantheon-flavored Lando site, you'll get fairly close parity to the entire Pantheon stack, which means that you'll get the version of nginx, the version of PHP, the version of Redis, the version of solr. We even have annoying things like Apache Tika, which Pantheon has. So if you have an app that uses that, it should work on Lando as well. And then we'll also give you some relevant tools for a Pantheon-flavored site. The big one there is Terminus. But we'll also give you things like the Redis CLI and a varnish admin command, so if you wanted to go in and hack that stuff around. One of the really nice things about Lando and Pantheon integration is if you're using a pantheon.yaml file, which you should be. If you are not, then yeah, you definitely should be. We will read in any configuration that's in that file and use that configuration. So if you change the PHP version in your pantheon.yaml file, Lando will see that and will change your PHP version. If you've specified nested doc root in your pantheon.yaml file, Lando will see that, and Lando will also use the nested doc root. We have nice utility commands, so if you want to do a push or pull directly with Pantheon, you can do that. By pull, I mean we will clone your code or get updates for your code base, pull your database down, pull your files down. Conversely, pushing does the opposite, pushes your code, pushes your database, pushes your files. Obviously, best practices alert, don't push your database. If you can avoid it, you're just asking for a world of pain at some point. And we have a nice utility command, Lando switch, that lets you bounce between multi-dev environments. Here's an example of some of the stuff that you would do. So like this bottom example is a fun usage example. This would be, I want to initialize my Lando site from my GitHub repository, but tell it that it's a Pantheon site. We do that a lot at Tandem because we use GitHub for almost all of our canonical upstreams. Let's skip over this. I would definitely check out the documentation. We have lots of really good tutorials and examples of how to set stuff up. I would also, if you're someone who's interested in setting up a very easy GitHub flow, Travis, Circle, build step, deploy to Pantheon or platform example, I would totally check out both of these two repositories. I did a presentation on the platform one earlier, or training on it earlier. Really easy to use Lando in Travis or Circle. The nice thing about that is you can get your whole site running in Travis or Circle with a couple of small commands, Lando commands, which is nice because that's sometimes a tricky thing to do in CI. Is there support? Yes. So we actually still use, that URL is wrong, which will redirect you. But we have GitHub issues. And we have, if you go to the old Calabox Slack pass URL, you can access our Slack channel. It's community-driven support, so don't expect instant replies, but there are a lot of people in those channels that will try to help you. And these are all really important things. I would go to all of these at some point, especially the last one. Very important to be inspired in a pure way. And maybe, if we can, take a couple of questions really quick, and then we'll have to close it down. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everything. Yeah.
If you're running Drupal multi-site, can you have two different local domains?
Yes. Yeah, so there are people who are using, people who do use multi-site. The big thing there is you'll want to use this, this proxy feature that we have. Let's see, where's that? Yeah, this proxy feature that we have is fairly well documented. This allows you to add additional domains to point to your site. So that would be the main thing you'd want to do. But basically what it would come down to is an example, like I could go in here and do proxy, and then say nginx or whatever the service is that has the thing, and just add like my other url.lando.site. Restart my app, and now I can have that domain point to this site as well.
Cool, thanks.
Yep. Yep.
You mentioned Lando is a couple of layers of abstraction over Docker. I was wondering if you could just describe those two layers of abstraction.
Yeah, so the first layer is basically is this, more or less, which are, you can configure these proxy URLs, all these different services, and tooling, which is essentially like, how do I map a nice command line sort of experience into like a relevant container to run the relevant thing. Recipes are just taking combinations of proxies, services, and tooling, and just basically packaging them into a single thing. So as an example, here's what the LAMP stack looks like if you were to use the first level of abstraction. It's just this long thing here. Coincidentally, this is also the example that is in the docs. So all of these things are collapsed into this example, which is just basically these two lines, which is to say that this equals what I just showed you. And they're all, you can override all of them. You also can use Docker Compose directly as well. So on any service, you can override any Docker Compose thing. So if you wanted to use your own image, for example, then you could do that. You also can tell Lando to, if I could do something like this. This is also documented, my compose.yaml. You could do something like this and have it just load your Docker Compose file. So the most trivial like Lando example is basically just like that, which is more or less, don't use me for anything that I'm valuable for, pass me directly to Docker Compose, which, you know, totally fine. Cool. Anything else? No? It's probably good because we're a little bit over.